It all started 3 weeks after I moved into my new home in Pinebrook Estates, a gated suburban community with perfectly manicured lawns, mailbox regulations, and more HOA bylaws than the U.S. Constitution. Basically, the kind of place where you think peace and order reigned, but which was in reality ruled by a tyrant in yoga pants named Karen. She wasn't just any Karen. She was the Karen, head of the HOA, self-appointed neighborhood warden, and queen of passive-aggressive Facebook posts about people who left their trash cans out 10 minutes too long. I didn't think much of her at first. I'd seen her on my first day moving in, arms crossed. Eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses as she watched me unload my U-Haul like a security guard scoping out a potential shoplifter. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said flatly, like it was both a threat and a warning. I chalked her attitude up to standard for nosiness and figured I'd be fine if I followed the rules and kept to myself. But that illusion shattered faster than a dropped wine glass the moment she began parking in my driveway. At first, it was a one-time thing, or so I thought. A white Lexus with custom KRN4LFE plates appeared in my driveway one Thursday morning, half an hour before I was supposed to leave for work. I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I finally walked outside to find Karen herself walking her miniature golden doodle across the street like nothing was wrong. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "I think you accidentally parked in my driveway." She didn't even blink. "Oh, I know. It's just for a minute, HOA business. I have to drop off an enforcement notice at the Andersons." Then she turned and walked off like she owned the pavement. I let it slide because I was new, and I didn't want to cause trouble over what I hoped was a one-time offense. But by the next week, it was every other day. Then every day. The white Lexus started arriving at 6:45 a.m. sharp and stayed until 10. If I needed to get out early, I'd have to knock on her door like a teenager asking permission to take his own damn car out of his own damn driveway. She'd always answer with some variation of "just 5 more minutes," followed by a smug smirk and that yappy dog barking behind her legs. I tried being polite. I tried asking nicely. I even tried writing a formal letter to the HOA. That's when I realized the rabbit hole I just stepped into. Karen was, though, or at least the one pulling all the strings. The board was basically her social club, filled with other suburban power trippers who owed her favors or were too afraid to challenge her. My complaints went nowhere. Worse, she started sending me citations. The irony was breathtaking. I was getting fined for unapproved mailbox paint and improper grass height while she used my driveway as her personal valet zone. One day, I found a violation taped to my door claiming my trash bins had been out past permitted hours, which was rich, considering I hadn't even brought them to the curb yet that week. It became clear that Karen had weaponized the HOA bylaws like they were a legal arsenal, and I was in her crosshairs. The final straw came on a Saturday. I'd planned a small backyard barbecue for my coworkers, people I was trying to bond with after transferring to a new branch. Everything was going well, grill sizzling, drinks flowing, until one of my guests tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey man, is someone supposed to be blocking your driveway?" I looked up, and sure enough, there was the white Lexus, parked at an angle like a drunk had parallel parked it blindfolded. I stormed across the street, furious but still trying to keep it civil. Karen answered the door holding a glass of white wine, clearly several sips into her weekend already. "I'm entertaining," she slurred slightly. "Where did you expect me to park?" There's no street parking on Saturdays because of HOA sweeping ordinances. You don't own that driveway, the HOA does. Read the bylaws. And just like that, she shut the door in my face. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, cycling between anger and disbelief, wondering how someone could be so flagrantly arrogant and still get away with it. My friends had laughed it off, thinking it was one of those harmless suburban quirks, but to me it wasn't funny anymore. It was invasive. It was controlling. It was petty dictatorship wrapped in HOA letterhead. I reread the neighborhood charter. I called the city. I even hired a real estate attorney to look into easement laws, only to discover that the HOA had cleverly written clauses that granted them communal parking rights in shared access driveways if emergency administrative business was being conducted. It was Karen's world, and I was just trying to park in it. I documented everything. I took photos. I started a log. But every time I submitted evidence to the HOA, I get a notice in return accusing me of harassment or surveillance activities that made neighbors feel unsafe. The irony was laughable, if it hadn't been so maddening. I started noticing other neighbors who had been cowed into submission. One had a garden gnome forcibly removed. Another had been fined $500 for painting his fence off-white instead of bone white. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was so tight, she could probably tell you the exact width of everyone's driveway, the brand of mulch in their flower beds, and the time their porch lights turned off. People didn't fight back because the fight wasn't worth the price. But me, I wasn't wired like that. There's only so many times you can be pushed before something inside you snaps, not in a reckless, angry way, but in that cold, calculated way that says, okay, game on. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I started planning. Not a prank. Not revenge. A statement. Something so absurd, so poetic, that would cut through the HOA red tape and land like a thunderclap. Because if Karen wanted to play this game, she was going to learn the hard way that I wasn't just some pushover neighbor with a complaint. I was a patient storm in khakis and a Henley shirt. And I had plans. If I thought Karen was bad before, it was nothing compared to the nightmare she became after I stopped playing nice. The moment she realized I wasn't going to back down quietly, it was like I'd challenged her authority in the Roman Senate, except instead of knives, she had OA citations and a burning vendetta. Her white Lexus now parked in my driveway with even more audacity, sometimes halfway over the lawn just to make a point, and she didn't even pretend to justify it anymore. She'd smirk at me across the street as if daring me to make a move, all while sipping from that god-awful live, laugh, love wine tumbler like she was starring in her own delusional reality show. Then came the first official warning letter, a thick envelope from the HOA citing me for unauthorized surveillance, hostile verbal exchanges, and my personal favorite, refusal to comply with community cooperative access doctrine, a phrase so vague and dystopian it sounded like it came out of a Kafka novel. She wasn't just writing the citations now, she was manufacturing them, weaponizing her position as HOA president like a kid with a paintball gun and no trigger discipline. Every day brought a new envelope taped to my door. One day it was excessive wind chimes. The next, potentially invasive plant species in my backyard flower beds. I hadn't even planted anything yet, just laid mulch. But the real kicker came when I was slapped with a $1,200 fine for public endangerment, all because I left a folding ladder leaning against my garage after fixing a gutter. Apparently, a child might have wandered onto my property and climbed it. I didn't even have kids. No one on my side of the street had kids. It was insane. And when I tried to appeal the citations at the monthly HOA meeting, I found out just how deep Karen's roots really ran. The room was filled with people who looked like they'd either been beaten into submission or had permanently confused fear with respect. I stood up, calm and prepared, with photos, documents, timestamps, even the name of a local city planner who confirmed the HOA had no legal right to occupy my driveway. Karen just smiled from her folding throne at the front of the room, surrounded by 3 other board members, her inner circle, all nodding along to everything she said like they'd been hypnotized. I presented my case for 10 minutes. When I finished, Karen cleared her throat and said, "Thank you for that performance." However, I moved to reject Mr. Carter's appeal on grounds of neighborhood destabilization and disruptive behavior. No one blinked. No one objected. The gavel came down. That was it. One sentence, and they dismissed my entire case like I was a drunk guy shouting conspiracy theories in a diner. It was then I realized there was no winning within their system. Karen didn't just bend the rules, she was the rules. From that point on, it was psychological warfare. She installed a motion-activated floodlight aimed directly at my bedroom window, claiming it was for security reasons, even though it only went off when I move in my own home. Her dog started relieving itself exclusively on my lawn, always off-leash, and when I brought it up, she sent me a warning about leash laws with a sticky note. Let me know if you need help understanding the simple ordinances. One day, a city employee showed up saying he was there to inspect a potential code violation related to an illegal structure. I was completely confused, until he pointed to the birdhouse in my backyard. Karen had filed an anonymous complaint that it was technically a freestanding building, not approved in the community plan. I laughed at first. Then I wanted to scream. Then I realized I was done playing by her rules. The more I pushed back, the more she escalated. My garbage can mysteriously disappeared one morning and reappeared 2 days later filled with spoiled food and dead flowers. A few of my packages went missing, and when I asked around, a neighbor timidly told me he saw Karen talking to the delivery driver about a missed delivery and walking off with one of my boxes. I filed a police report, but without video evidence or a confession, nothing came of it. I ordered a security camera and mounted it above my garage, careful to keep it within legal angles. And within a week, the HOA passed a temporary moratorium on new security equipment pending safety audits, which, shockingly, only applied to my property. I got a visit from a city official claiming I had excessive external monitoring, which violated an obscure zoning code that Karen had clearly dug up like a truffle pig sniffing for leverage. I started to feel like I was losing my grip. My blood pressure was rising. I was starting to snap at coworkers. I dreaded coming home. That's when I knew she wasn't just trying to dominate me. She wanted to break me. But the thing about people like Karen is they never expect you to adapt. They never expect the quiet ones to turn. She mistook my silence for weakness, my patience for cowardice, and she had no idea who she was messing with. The truth is, I've been through worse. Much worse. And while Karen was busy playing chess with plastic pieces, I've been quietly building a 4D model of the entire board. She wanted a war. Fine. But I wasn't going to wage it in the HOA meetings or through paperwork. I was going to hit her where it hurt, not physically, not illegally, but symbolically. Something poetic. Something unforgettable. Because the best revenge isn't destruction, it's spectacle. And there's a certain kind of justice that lands harder when it looks impossible, when it makes people stop and stare and say, how the hell did he do that? So I started researching cranes. Not little ones, the kind that lift 40 tons and cost thousands to rent. I started talking to people. A friend from college worked in film rigging. Another owed me a favor from a previous life, back when I did a brief stint consulting for a construction logistics firm before going corporate. I asked questions. I learned what it would take. I drew up a plan. I calculated weight, angle, clearance. I studied her house like it was a mission blueprint. I even started jogging past it each morning to measure distances and check for blind spots. Every single petty citation she slapped on me after that just added fuel to the fire. I kept my face neutral. I kept playing the dumb neighbor. But behind the scenes, I was assembling the components of a masterstroke, a moment she would never forget. And neither would the neighborhood. Because when someone keeps parking in your driveway and acting like they own your life, there comes a moment where you don't just want them to stop. You want them to feel it. You want them to taste the absurdity they've been serving everyone else. And soon, very soon, Karen was going to wake up, walk outside in her slippers, and see her Lexus where she least expected it. Not on my driveway, but on her roof. Not just revenge. Art. The beauty of revenge isn't in its speed. It's in its symmetry, its quiet deliberation, and the satisfaction of knowing that every brick in the foundation was placed with precision, patience, and purpose. Karen had no idea, none at all, that while she was busy measuring the angle of my trash bins with a protractor and trying to get my garden hose labeled a safety hazard, I was deep in the throes of an operation that would make David Copperfield jealous. The plan to get her car onto her roof wasn't born out of whimsy or insanity. It was forged in a slow-burn crucible of HOA-induced torment and refined by the sort of quiet genius that comes from being underestimated for far too long. I wasn't just going to move her car. I was going to redefine neighborhood legends. I wanted kids on tricycles to point at that house for decades and say, that's where the car on the roof thing happened. I started with reconnaissance. Every day for 2 weeks, I jogged past her house at dawn, noting her routines. When she left, when she returned, how long her dog walk lasted, whether she left the car unlocked in the driveway. She did. Because of course she did. Karen believed she was untouchable. I used a laser measurer to quietly calculate the distance from the street to her house, then checked the pitch and support structure of her roof using a drone I claimed was for real estate photography. I also needed a team, people who could be trusted to not just keep their mouths shut, but to understand the stakes and appreciate the artistry of what we were about to do. I reached out to Todd, my old roommate from undergrad who now worked film rigging for blockbuster action movies. The guy could lift a car onto a barge using 2 ratchet straps and a bucket of Red Bull. Then there was Mike, a semi-retired welder with a love for creative mischief and access to all the equipment we'd need to fabricate a custom car cradle that wouldn't damage the shingles. I called in a favor with Erica, a city planner I once helped out of a messy zoning dispute. She didn't help directly, but she gave me everything I needed to know about temporary road closures, municipal blind spots, and loopholes in city surveillance protocols. The final piece was a crane, massive, mobile, and whisper quiet for its size. Renting one under the radar wasn't easy, but luckily a local special effects company owed Todd a favor after he bailed them out during a rush job. We scheduled a weekend overnight film shoot that just happened to fall on the night Karen would be out at a mandatory HOA leadership retreat 2 towns over. And just like that, the window was open. One night. 4 hours. Zero margin for error. The prep began days in advance. I parked my car down the street to keep the driveway clear and told my neighbors I'd be doing a rooftop solar install demo for a company I was considering investing in. I fabricated a couple of fake magnetic signs for the truck, Sunbeam Tech, Tomorrow's Energy Today, and wore a high-vis vest to sell the illusion. The neighborhood didn't question it. Everyone either hated Karen or feared her, and most people were happy to believe anything that might make her life marginally less comfortable. By the time Saturday night rolled around, we were locked in. Karen had left at 5:03 p.m. sharp in yoga pants and an overstuffed monogrammed tote bag. Her white Lexus was parked diagonally across my driveway like always. Only this time, she hadn't noticed the subtle tire guides I'd chalked into the pavement to align it just right. At 11:43 p.m., the crane rolled in. Todd coordinated the lift with a headset like a symphony conductor, barking quiet commands while Mike secured the car's underframe with a suspension cradle strong enough to hold a pickup. The Lexus rose into the night like an ascending spaceship, its headlights glinting under the moonlight, and we held our breath as it hovered over her house. We didn't just drop it onto the roof. That would have damaged both the car and the shingles. We had built a custom landing platform, a reinforced aluminum grid panel that sat flush against the roof slope, bolted into anchor points we installed in advance using drilled temporary mounts, reversible but strong. The Lexus settled into place like a crown, perfectly balanced, wheels locked, and not a single tile out of place. It looked surreal, regal, even. Like some suburban Banksy installation making a statement about entitlement and ego. We cleared everything in under 90 minutes. The crane vanished into the night, the riggers packed their gear, and by 2:12 a.m., there was no sign anything had happened, except for the car, perched atop Karen's roof like a smug monument to poetic justice. I sat across the street on my porch, sipping coffee, waiting for dawn. The sun rose slowly, golden bright, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac. Birds chirped. Sprinklers hissed. Then, at 6:48 a.m., Karen's front door opened. She shuffled out in slippers, phone in one hand, dog leash in the other, half asleep and cranky like she always was after these retreats. She walked down her path, looked up to the driveway, froze, then slowly turned her gaze skyward. The scream she let out could have shattered a wine glass. It echoed across the neighborhood like a siren. She dropped her phone, the leash slipped, her dog ran off barking, and Karen just stood there pointing up at the Lexus like she was hallucinating. I could see her lips move. "What the hell?" I waved. She didn't wave back. A neighbor emerged from their porch. Then another. Then another. By 7:03 a.m., there were 24 people on the street, cameras out, jaws open. Someone yelled, "Is that Karen's car?" And just like that, it went viral. Karen lost her mind. She called the police, who showed up baffled but amused. No sign of forced entry, no damage, and technically, the car was on her own property. Then the fire department came. Then a news van. I played dumb the entire time. "Must be some prank," I told the reporters. You know how those internet trends are. Probably teenagers with a drone. But behind the poker face, I was beaming. Not because I'd gotten even. Not because of the applause or the viral videos. But because I'd finally taken something back, control. Karen had spent months making me feel like I didn't belong in my own home, like she could walk all over me with impunity. But now every time she looked up, she'd be reminded that someone pushed back and did it with style. The best part? The HOA was powerless. There was no bylaw about roof-mounted vehicles. No clause about unauthorized altitudinal parking. Karen filed complaints. She demanded investigations. But the city deemed the situation a private property anomaly, and without proof of who'd done it, they couldn't justify the cost of forcibly removing the car. Her insurance wouldn't cover it because the car wasn't stolen. Her towing request got denied because no standard tow truck could access a rooftop. And her own smug belief in the invincibility of property law had backfired beautifully. She was stuck, with a Lexus on her shingles and no one to blame but herself. Even better, when she tried to step down and quietly sell her house a few weeks later, every potential buyer walked away laughing. "You can't be serious," one of them said. "I'm not buying the rooftop Lexus house." That's when I knew I hadn't just gotten revenge. I'd altered her reality, and I was just getting started. If there's one universal truth about tyrants, whether they're dictators or HOA presidents with Pinterest obsessions, it's that they rarely know how to handle public humiliation, and Karen was no exception. After the rooftop Lexus incident, she unraveled in real time, like a spool of yarn being chased by a cat with a grudge. The morning after, she held a so-called emergency HOA meeting on her lawn, surrounded by a few loyalists and several folding chairs, but no one took her seriously anymore. The neighbors had seen the footage, laughed at the memes, and taken screenshots of her shrieking under the car-shaped shadow of her own hubris. Someone even changed her entry on the neighborhood directory to Karen Lexus Queen. That alone sent her into a meltdown, so loud it made the HOA Facebook group go into lockdown mode. She tried to spin the story, of course. Claimed she was the victim of targeted harassment, cyberbullying, and vehicular vandalism by air, but no one was buying it. The cops couldn't press charges. There was no footage of the operation. The crane was rented legally under a film shoot license, and I made sure every permit lined up perfectly. It was, for all intents and purposes, a legal anomaly, and one that everyone secretly enjoyed watching unfold. Her authority crumbled faster than a Costco folding table in a windstorm. The other HOA board members began distancing themselves, citing leadership fatigue and unprecedented community backlash. One by one, they resigned, their reputations dissolving under the weight of neighborhood memes and wine-fueled porch gossip. Karen, however, refused to back down. She doubled her efforts, sending new citations to anyone who laughed too loudly near her house or posted rooftop jokes online. But the paper had no teeth anymore. Her letters ended up in mailboxes with sarcastic annotations or returned unopened, sometimes with glitter or notes that said, "Your authority has been towed." Meanwhile, the Lexus remained exactly where I'd left it, anchored perfectly on her roof, a white monument to poetic justice that even the weather seemed to respect. When she finally hired a private company to remove it, they took one look and quoted her a number so high it made her eyes water. She called the city again. They told her the same thing. "It's on your property, ma'am. You'll have to handle it privately." By month's end, she was spiraling. Her lawn overgrew for the first time in 10 years. Her garbage cans were left out past curfew. And the most shocking sign of her breakdown? She stopped yelling at the neighborhood kids who chalked no parking zones in front of their own driveways. She no longer prowled the sidewalks with a clipboard, no longer peered through curtains when someone parked slightly crooked. She became a ghost in yoga pants, drifting from room to room in a house she once ruled, now reduced to a punchline. And I watched quietly. Not smug, not gloating, just satisfied. Because I hadn't just fought back, I'd changed something. I'd sparked a shift in the neighborhood, cracked the shell of fear she'd built over the years. The neighbors who once cowered now laughed. They organized barbecues, started a community watch without the HOA's involvement, and even painted their mailboxes whatever damn color they wanted. The whole neighborhood transformed, not into chaos, but into actual community. And then came the best part, the reveal. Up until that point, I had kept a low profile, said nothing publicly, and played the innocent bystander with all the convincing boredom of a man who just wanted peace. But the opportunity came during the first neighborhood-wide meeting to re-establish the HOA under new leadership. This time, a voluntary advisory council that would exist purely for organizing events and pooling resources for common area maintenance. The old HOA charter was officially dissolved. I was invited to speak, not as a candidate, but as a resident. I walked up to the podium in the community center gym, nodded politely at the familiar faces, and took a deep breath. Some of you know me as the guy whose driveway was treated like public property. Some of you might think I just moved here to grill and garden in peace. But there's something you should all probably know. I paused, then smiled. I'm a structural logistics engineer with federal clearance, and before that, I was the lead infrastructure consultant for 3 major urban development firms, including one that designed rooftop airlifts for emergency vehicles. The silence that followed was beautiful. A few jaws dropped. Someone actually said, "No way." Karen, sitting in the very back, sunglasses on indoors, sank further into her chair like it might swallow her whole. "I didn't come here to make trouble," I continued. "But I also didn't come here to be pushed around. I believe in order, in rules. But I also believe that authority without accountability leads to tyranny, even if it's disguised in HOA letterhead." Applause followed. Not thunderous, but warm, steady real. People clapped not because I was dramatic, but because I had finally said what everyone else had been thinking for years. Afterward, several neighbors approached me, shaking my hand, some whispering things like, "Thank you for doing what we all wished we could." She had it coming. Karen didn't speak to me. She slipped out before the end of the meeting, her Lexus still parked above her head like a crown of shame. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood thrived. Without the constant threat of petty fines and weaponized bylaws, people actually talked to each other again. Lawn chairs appeared on front porches. Kids played basketball in driveways. One guy painted his fence bright teal, and nobody said a word. I even hosted another barbecue, this time without anyone blocking my driveway, and people brought dishes, music, stories. I became more than just the new guy. I became a neighbor. As for Karen, she listed her house 6 times, took it off the market each time when buyers inevitably asked about the incident. Eventually, she moved quietly in the middle of the night. No goodbye letter. No final speech. Just gone. The Lexus? Still there until the new owners, some chill young couple, turned it into a rooftop garden display. They named it Karma. And me? I went back to my normal life. Work, hobbies, peace. But now I had something more: respect, friendships, a driveway that stayed empty unless I decided otherwise. More importantly, I become a reminder that there's always a limit to abuse, even in the suburbs. That sometimes poetic justice requires a crane and a little nerve. That even in the most manicured neighborhoods, under the watchful eye of the most entitled overseers, someone quiet might just be the one with the loudest final word. And sometimes that word is not spoken at all, but placed gently, defiantly, right on the roof.